Long before the laughter spilling from crowded taverns, before musicians filled narrow streets with fiddles and song, before postcards framed it as a charming European getaway, this city lived a far harsher life. The story of Dublin begins in cold salt air and uncertainty, where raiders from the north pushed wooden ships through dark coastal waters and claimed a tidal pool as their stronghold, setting in motion more than 1,000 years of struggle, ambition, and reinvention. What began as a rough Viking outpost grew into a prize fought over by rival kingdoms, a strategic jewel claimed by distant crowns, and a restless capital where ordinary people were repeatedly swept into extraordinary conflict. Empires tightened their grip, rebels answered with defiance, and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble in clashes that reshaped Ireland's future and echoed far beyond its shores. Beneath the colorful storefronts and friendly accents lies a past marked by sieges, political crackdowns, famine, and uprisings that turned citizens into symbols of resistance. Each cobblestone carries the weight of lives interrupted, families divided, and decisions made in moments of fear that altered the direction of a nation. This is a true story of power, control, sacrifice, and endurance stretching from medieval fortresses to modern glass towers, where history is never as distant as it appears. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand Dublin, you have to look beyond the travel guides and cheerful celebrations and ask harder questions about conquest, loyalty, identity, and the cost of freedom. How did a small riverside settlement founded by sea raiders become a focal point of imperial rule and later a heartbeat of revolution that inspired movements across the world? How did centuries of tension between local citizens and foreign authority transform narrow streets into flashpoints that would decide the fate of a people determined to define themselves? And why does the legacy of those struggles still shape the culture, politics, and character of the city today, long after the smoke cleared and the gunfire faded into memory? This journey moves through Viking ambition, medieval power struggles, colonial control, and explosive rebellion, revealing turning points that traditional history summaries often rush past, but that hold the key to understanding why Dublin became one of Europe's most contested capitals. The mystery surrounding Dublin deepens the moment we question its beginnings, because the city's origin is still debated by historians who trace its foundations to early Celtic communities living along the River Liffey long before Norse longships appeared on the horizon, while others argue it was the arrival of hardened Viking raiders that transformed a quiet riverside settlement into a fortified trading hub that would anchor future power struggles. These Norse settlers established a port they called Dublh Linn, constructing defenses, marketplaces, and shipyards that turned Dublin into one of the most important coastal strongholds in the Irish Sea, laying structural foundations that shaped the city's layout for centuries. Yet Dublin's growth also made it a strategic prize, drawing the attention of expanding kingdoms across Britain and beyond, each determined to control its ports, tax its trade routes, and command influence over Ireland itself. This constant tug of power placed Dublin at the heart of repeated clashes between Irish resistance movements and the authority of the British Empire, creating a cycle of rebellion and retaliation that hardened the city's political identity. Tensions that simmered for generations eventually erupted during the Easter Rising of 1916, when Irish Republicans seized key locations across Dublin and declared independence, triggering a chain reaction of political consequences that reached far beyond Ireland and inspired liberation movements around the world. The events of that single week demonstrated how deeply the desire for self-determination had taken root among ordinary citizens who transformed into revolutionaries willing to risk everything for sovereignty. Dublin's streets became symbols of defiance, its buildings witnesses to artillery fire and desperate last stands, and its people central figures in a struggle that challenged imperial dominance during a period of global instability. These defining moments force us to confront difficult questions about whether Dublin was shaped more by commerce or conquest, whether foreign control strengthened or suppressed its development, and how centuries of unrest forged a collective identity built on resilience. This is far more than a timeline of urban growth or architectural change, because Dublin represents the intersection of empire, rebellion, cultural survival, and national self-definition, making its history a powerful lens through which to understand Ireland's enduring pursuit of independence and the lasting global impact of its resistance. Long before Dublin rose along the banks of the River Liffey, Ireland was a landscape shaped by Celtic clans whose lives revolved around kinship, honor, and deeply rooted spiritual traditions passed down through generations of oral storytelling. Communities were scattered across rolling green valleys and dense forests, governed by Gaelic tribal systems where local chieftains ruled small territories and druids served as spiritual guides, legal authorities, and keepers of knowledge. Sacred sites dotted the countryside, from stone circles aligned with the skies to ancient burial mounds that preserved the memory of forgotten leaders, creating a society that valued ancestry, myth, and connection to the land. Flowing quietly through this evolving world was the River Liffey, a natural lifeline that provided fishing routes, fresh water, transportation corridors, and access to the Irish Sea, gradually turning its surrounding banks into desirable ground for settlement and trade. Over time, small communities formed near the river's mouth, recognizing its value as a defensive boundary and commercial gateway, unknowingly laying the geographic foundation for what Dublin would later become. Yet Ireland's relative isolation from continental power struggles would not endure, because distant seafaring forces had already begun expanding their reach across European coastlines in search of wealth, territory, and influence. By the early 9th century, Norse adventurers navigating treacherous Atlantic waters identified Ireland's eastern shores as vulnerable entry points, and in 841 AD Viking longships pushed inland through tidal channels toward the River Liffey, where warriors established a fortified encampment at a deep, dark pool they called Dublh Linn. What began as a temporary base soon evolved into a permanent settlement protected by wooden palisades and earthwork defenses, allowing Norse leaders to dominate regional trade routes while launching raids further inland. Dublin quickly developed into a major commercial center where silver, textiles, weapons, and captured people were bought and sold, linking Ireland to vast trading networks that stretched across Scandinavia and mainland Europe. Norse settlers intermarried with Gaelic families, blending languages, customs, and craftsmanship into a distinct cultural fusion that reshaped local society and architecture. Dublin was never designed as a peaceful village, because its streets and fortifications reflected strategic planning, economic ambition, and military control intended to secure power along the Irish coast. Yet even as the Viking presence strengthened Dublin's defenses and prosperity, new rivals were already watching from across the Irish Sea, preparing ambitions that would once again transform the city's destiny. The stability Dublin had built under Norse control began to fracture as new powers turned their attention toward Ireland, recognizing that whoever commanded Dublin could influence trade, military positioning, and political authority across the island. In 1169, that fragile balance shattered when armored forces from Britain landed on Irish shores under the leadership of Strongbow, launching the Anglo-Norman conquest with disciplined formations, superior weaponry, and a determination to secure territory for their crown. What began as a regional intervention quickly evolved into a sweeping campaign that redrew Ireland's political landscape, and Dublin, with its fortified position near the River Liffey and access to the Irish Sea, became a primary objective. Anglo-Norman forces reinforced existing defenses and constructed imposing stone castles whose towering walls projected dominance and permanence, replacing earlier wooden structures with architecture designed to withstand prolonged sieges and intimidate resistance. Streets were reorganized, trade systems redirected, and governance reshaped to serve foreign interests, transforming Dublin from a Norse stronghold into the administrative center of a growing colonial framework. English influence deepened through legal systems, land redistribution, and military garrisons that embedded external authority into everyday life, gradually altering cultural practices and political loyalties. This transformation intensified when King Henry II asserted direct control, recognizing Dublin's strategic importance and establishing it as England's command center in Ireland, where royal officials could oversee taxation, enforce laws, and coordinate defensive operations. Dublin now stood not merely as a city, but as the operational heart of foreign governance, linking Ireland's fate to decisions made across the sea and tightening the Crown's grip on regional affairs. Yet beneath this structured expansion, resentment quietly intensified among native Irish communities who viewed the new order as an erosion of autonomy, land rights, and cultural identity, fueling tensions that would echo across generations. Foreign rule reshaped Dublin's skyline and institutions, but it also planted grievances that would mature into organized resistance, ensuring that political control remained contested rather than secure. The city's growing prominence made it both a symbol of authority and a focal point of opposition, locking Dublin into a cycle where every assertion of dominance provoked demands for self-determination. These medieval power struggles hardened divisions, strengthened defensive infrastructures, and embedded Dublin deeper into imperial strategy, setting conditions for future confrontations that would transform the city into a recurring stage for rebellion, negotiation, and renewed conflict. As the centuries passed, Dublin evolved under the weight of empire, its streets expanding with the elegance of Georgian architecture, wide avenues lined with refined townhouses, and public squares that reflected the wealth and ambitions of those in power. Yet beneath the polished facades, the city was deeply divided. The Protestant ascendancy dominated politics, commerce, and property ownership, consolidating influence in ways that ensured Catholics and other marginalized communities were systematically excluded from meaningful participation in civic life. The penal laws reinforced this inequality, restricting Catholic worship, education, land ownership, and professional opportunities, leaving vast portions of Dublin's population impoverished while a select few thrived. Trinity College Dublin, founded centuries earlier, symbolized more than scholarship. It became a gatekeeper of privilege, an institution where power and learning were intertwined, and access was dictated by religious and social status. Elegant parliament buildings and grand civic structures projected the image of a prosperous, orderly city, yet just steps away, crowded tenements and narrow alleyways held families struggling to survive under economic and social oppression. Everyday life for many Dubliners was shaped by both material hardship and cultural suppression, from restrictions on language and education to the subtle enforcement of hierarchy that reminded them of their subjugated place. These disparities created a simmering tension beneath the city's orderly exterior, an undercurrent of discontent that could not be contained indefinitely. The visible wealth and refinement of Dublin's central districts concealed a society fractured along lines of faith, class, and access, and while the city's skyline reflected stability and authority, the streets themselves whispered of grievances that would eventually erupt into political upheaval. Resentment was quietly building, and every parade, every flag, every statement of dominance by those in power fed a sense that Dublin's future could no longer be dictated solely by imperial design. The city had become a living paradox, magnificent and orderly to the eye, yet tense, restless, and poised on the brink of change, as generations of citizens nurtured the desire for recognition, equality, and the reclaiming of their own identity. By the early months of 1916, Dublin had become a city simmering with both pride and frustration, a place where decades of economic inequality, cultural suppression, and political marginalization had nurtured a deep desire for change. In April of that year, that desire crystallized into action when a small but determined group of Irish rebels moved swiftly to seize control of key locations across the city, signaling the start of what would become known as the Easter Rising. Among the most symbolic and strategically vital of these locations was the General Post Office Dublin, where leaders climbed its steps to deliver a proclamation that would echo far beyond the city's boundaries. With unwavering resolve, they declared the establishment of an independent Irish republic, challenging centuries of foreign control and asserting the right of ordinary citizens to determine their own destiny. The response was swift and overwhelming. British forces, equipped with artillery and well-trained troops, moved to suppress the rebellion with force that devastated central Dublin, reducing entire blocks to rubble and displacing countless civilians caught in the crossfire. Streets once familiar became scenes of destruction, and the city's historic architecture bore the scars of conflict that would be remembered for generations. Within days, the uprising was effectively crushed, its leaders arrested or executed, and the immediate hope of independence extinguished. Yet, Despite its apparent failure, the Easter Rising marked a turning point. It galvanized public opinion, inspired political movements across Ireland and abroad, and set into motion events that would ultimately alter the trajectory of the British Empire itself. The rebellion's impact was far greater than its brief duration suggested, and though Dublin lay in ruins, the ideas ignited on those streets would continue to burn, shaping the identity of the city and the nation for decades to come. The rebellion failed in its immediate objectives, but the consequences of those bold acts of defiance would ripple across time, ensuring that Dublin would never again be seen simply as a provincial capital under foreign rule, but as the heartbeat of a people determined to reclaim their freedom. In the years following the Easter Rising, Dublin became the epicenter of a struggle that would define modern Ireland, as the Irish War of Independence unfolded with relentless intensity. Guerrilla units, operating in the shadows of the city's streets and alleyways, staged ambushes against British forces, blending into the urban landscape while executing precise, calculated attacks that unsettled even the most disciplined troops. Intelligence warfare became just as crucial as combat, with networks of spies, informants, and coded messages directing operations that could turn the tide of a single engagement, and civilians often found themselves caught in the crossfire, their loyalties tested, and their lives endangered as the city itself became a strategic weapon. Leading these efforts was Michael Collins, a figure whose mastery of guerrilla strategy transformed Dublin into a battlefield of shadows, where swift raids and sudden disappearances created an atmosphere of constant vigilance and tension. Collins' tactics and leadership not only challenged British control, but also inspired widespread support among ordinary citizens, many of whom risked everything to provide intelligence, shelter, or aid to the revolutionaries. The eventual signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty brought a fragile peace, but its terms divided the nation, creating rifts between former allies and setting the stage for civil war. Dublin, which had already endured so much, once again became a city under siege, where streets that had witnessed uprisings now saw neighbor turn against neighbor, barricades erected in anticipation of ambushes, and artillery fire reducing familiar neighborhoods to rubble. The internal conflict that followed left scars not only on the city's landscape, but on its people, as the lines between friend and foe blurred, and political convictions demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Through these turbulent years, Dublin's identity was forged in fire and resistance, its citizens molded by both the courage and tragedy of those who sought to define the city and the nation on their own terms, proving that even in the aftermath of destruction, the human spirit could find ways to persist, adapt, and fight for its vision of freedom. From the ashes of rebellion and civil strife, Dublin began a slow but determined process of reinvention, emerging as a city that blended resilience with innovation. The scars of war and occupation remained etched in its streets and buildings, yet those very streets became the canvas for a cultural revival, as citizens sought to reclaim their identity through art, literature, and music. Economic struggles persisted, but they were met with ingenuity and adaptation, as small businesses, markets, and eventually industrial and commercial hubs began to reshape the city's economy. Over time, Dublin also became a center for technological growth, attracting industries that connected it to global networks, and tourism emerged as visitors from around the world came to witness the city's history, architecture, and spirit firsthand. The literary legacy of Dublin played a crucial role in this transformation, with writers like James Joyce immortalizing the city through works such as Ulysses, capturing both the minutiae of everyday life and the enduring weight of history, giving the city a voice that resonated far beyond Ireland. Today, Dublin is celebrated for its music, culture, and unyielding resilience, a place where the vibrancy of modern life coexists with the memory of struggles long past, and where every corner, every alley, and every square carries the stories of those who fought, endured, and dreamed, ensuring that the city's history remains alive in the hearts of those who walk its streets. Dublin is more than a capital. It is a survivor. Centuries of conquest, rebellion, and renewal have left their mark on every street, every river bend, and every building. Yet the city endures, continually reinventing itself while carrying the weight of its past. A city shaped by Viking ambition, Norman conquest, English rule, uprisings like the Easter Rising, the campaigns of Michael Collins, and the turmoil of civil war has emerged with a character forged in resilience and determination. Its people have endured famine, artillery, political upheaval, and social divisions, yet they rebuilt, reimagined, and preserved a sense of identity that continues to define Dublin today. Every cobblestone tells a story, every monument whispers history, and every literary work, from James Joyce to contemporary voices, reminds the world of the city's depth and endurance. The question is, if a city remembers its past, if it carries the echoes of every struggle and triumph, can it ever truly escape it? Or does that history become inseparable from the life of its people, guiding how they live, celebrate, and dream in the present? Which moment in Dublin's history surprised you the most? Was it the bold seizure of the General Post Office during the Easter Rising, the cunning strategies of Michael Collins in turning the streets into a battlefield of shadows, or the city's remarkable transformation from ruins into a hub of culture, literature, and technology? Do you think rebellion was inevitable, given centuries of foreign control, social inequality, and the enduring desire for self-determination among its citizens? If you enjoyed this deep dive into Dublin's story, subscribe for more cinematic explorations of cities that shaped our world, where every street, building, and story holds the echoes of past struggles and triumphs. And for our next episode, prepare to journey to the European city divided by a wall, a place where neighbors became enemies overnight, and where the lessons of history continue to resonate with startling clarity and relevance.